It's been fascinating to watch the way U.S. intelligence assessments have been so spot on, almost predictive, not only capable of seeing many of Vladimir Putin's next steps, but of pointing them out, of collecting them, analyzing them, and declassifying them almost in real time, over and over again. Even before the invasion of Ukraine, intelligence agencies correctly warned the American people about false pretexts and the Kremlin's overall strategy. Now there's a new warning, one that hits even closer to home for all of us. The Associated Press is reporting this. Intelligence officials say Putin, quote, may use the Biden administration's support for Ukraine as a pretext to order a new campaign to interfere in American politics. Well, those officials say there's no evidence that a plot similar to 2016 and 2020 has been authorized. There are still major concerns from that new reporting. Quote, given Putin's antipathy toward the West and his repeated denunciations of Ukraine, officials believe he may see the U.S. backing of Ukraine's resistance as a direct affront to him, giving him further incentive to target another U.S. election, those people said. It's not yet clear which candidates Russia might try to promote or what methods it might use. Joining us now, BBC News U.S. special correspondent Katty Kay. Ben Rhodes is back, former deputy national security advisor to President Obama. And Charlie Sykes is here, editor-at-large of The Bulwark, all MSNBC contributors. Charlie, because you're the least polite of all of us, not counting me, I'm the least polite of all. We know exactly who they were trying to help. They try to help the people who called Vladimir Putin clever and genius. They try to help the Republicans.
Well, why wouldn't he try to do this at this point? Over the weekend, the West had kind of a shock, worried about what would happen if you had a far-right Putin fan elected as the president of France. Well, think about that for a moment. But the election of a far-right Putin fan as president of the United States is that times 1,000. So we've already lived through all of that. Look, Vladimir Putin's return on investment of his intervention in the past in American politics has been beyond calculation. He's miscalculated badly in Ukraine. But if his goal was to sow chaos and dissent in American politics, he has succeeded. If his goal was to install, at least for 4 years, someone who shared his views of NATO, then he also had succeeded. Look, there's no reason why he would not, if he's in a position to do so, interfere in 2024. Look, he may be losing on the battlefield in Ukraine. He may be losing in the West. NATO may be more united than ever. It may add Sweden and Finland, but none of that matters if he is able to get one of his allies back into the Oval Office in 2024. That would be a catastrophic success for Vladimir Putin. So he has every incentive to interfere in our politics again.
And don't take our word for it. Take the word of John Bolton. Let me read you this from today's New York Times, Ben Rhodes. This is from a piece entitled, "This Was Trump Pulling a Putin." When I asked whether he believed Trump could be viewed as an authoritarian, John Bolton replied, quote, "He's not smart enough to be an authoritarian. But had Donald Trump won in 2020, Bolton told me, in his second term, he might well have inflicted, quote, damage that might not be reparable. I asked whether his same concerns would apply if Trump were to gain another term in 2024. Bolton answered with one word. Yes.
I mean, the thing is, just like Charlie wasn't subtle about who Putin would be interfering to help, the reality is we don't have to be subtle about the fact that we know Donald Trump wanted to pull out of NATO. Multiple advisors have said that he wanted to do that and was restrained from doing so. I cannot think of anything that could be better for Vladimir Putin than maybe not pulling out of NATO, but certainly having a president who would not even say aloud the Article 5 commitment to the common defense of NATO allies until he was literally dragged into doing it, who basically fought with our key European allies throughout his presidency. Having somebody like that in the White House at the height of the most significant conflict in Europe since World War II would be a massive strategic victory for Vladimir Putin. It would create chaos among the alliance that's going to have to hang together for at least the next 3 years. I think, tragically, given the way this war looks, we're in a much longer potential struggle with either Russia or autocracy generally. And frankly, in the battle between democracy and autocracy in the world, which I think is the right framing that President Biden has used, you would have somebody on the wrong side of that battle in the White House if Donald Trump gets back in the White House for 4 more years. So, of course, he has every incentive to interfere in this election, and he has every incentive to potentially try to go beyond what he's done in the past, which is social media and the hacking and releasing the emails, and to cross that line into things like trying to interfere with the election itself, right, which was always the worst case scenario. Maybe not capable of swinging votes, but creating havoc by trying to crash election infrastructure. You could see him try to do that to not only try to help Donald Trump, but potentially just throw the results in such doubt that it creates chaos here in the United States.
And Katty Kay, the harrowing scenario that was described to me, and I've said this on the show before by a former DOJ prosecutor, is that we've gotten better at protecting ourselves in some ways, but we've become more divided, more fractured, and one of the two parties does not have faith in our elections thanks to Donald Trump. You got a big chunk, 30% of the country, that doesn't think the results of what Chris Krebs described as the most secure election in America's history is legit. So you've got a country like pre-broken, pre-crumbled. And when he analyzed the comments that people like Tucker Carlson, Mike Pompeo, and Donald Trump made on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, he said that's all they have to do. Call him genius, call him clever, say nice things about him. They can circulate in a loop on Russia Today, and their aid from Russia is secure.
Yeah, and look, one of the reasons that we are as divided as we are in the United States is because Russia's had a hand in stoking those divisions. A European intelligence official told me recently that they'd seen evidence that it was Russian groups who had been funding anti-vax campaigns here in the United States. And they were kind of puzzled by this. I think, why are they putting so much money into anti-vax groups here in America? Why are they trying to foment that? And it's pretty clear it's really being done just to stoke those kind of divisions, and there's some correlation between anti-vax groups and Donald Trump supporters, and so that ties in together as well. I think, we're in a moment where it's not just potentially Republicans who aren't going to trust the democratic system. If we have a 2024 election where there's been so much change, so many changes to the voting laws, you have the potential that if it's very close and it looks like unfair changes to the voting laws sway the vote, Democrats won't believe the system either. And this is exactly what Xi Jinping, what Vladimir Putin, what Viktor Orban, it's exactly what they want. Whatever the method is, whether it's direct attacks on Ukraine, chemical attacks on British soil or in Syria, whether it's misinformation and disinformation campaigns, the end is the same. The end is to break Europe away from America, to divide European allies, to cause disunity in the West. That's what Vladimir Putin wants to do. He'll just pick whatever tool it is to get there. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he would try to interfere in the next election. In fact, the only thing that would surprise me is that he wouldn't try to interfere.